Hello friends. This video is the third in a four-part series on tools for the beginner photographer. We covered fixed lens cameras in the first part, DSLRs in the second part, and now in number 3 we are discussing mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras, the ones that we submit as options for those of you just getting started in photography. Raymond and I have chosen only cameras that we've used, and we will share lots of photos that we've captured over the years with those cameras and those lenses. But of course, these aren't the only options. For those of you out there that have a good suggestion that we don't mention in this video, definitely leave a comment for others to read.
We ask for recommendations from you all because different people will want different things in a camera. There are various types of photography, multiple camera systems, and camera bodies are organized with unique terminology and features. Maybe there's some feature in particular that you're looking for, and there are certainly different budgets as well. In this video, we'll discuss some current generation camera bodies, but we chose to largely focus our recommendations on previous generation mirrorless cameras, the ones that were new just a few years ago. They strike a balance between capability and cost, and they still have amazing capabilities with both photo and video, plus lots of smarts. If you want things like face and eye detection, super fast autofocus tracking, it's all there, whether you're talking the latest and greatest or the ones from just a few years ago. And there's other things that come along with using mirrorless bodies 5 years ago and today's, like the lenses made for mirrorless bodies. They have the latest technology. Now there's plenty of lenses for legacy DSLRs that are very good, but there's also many older lenses that aren't. They don't meet today's mirrorless standard. When you're just getting started, that might not really be a big deal. But as you progress, you may end up wanting the edge-to-edge sharpness and in your lens, silent autofocusing, and overall higher tech that the new mirrorless lenses offer. And by the looks of the market, new DSLRs and DSLR lenses are being released less and less, and new mirrorless cameras and lenses are being released more and more. So if you do want to grow with the gear, if you do want the newest features, mirrorless is probably the way to go if you have the budget.
Yes. You can look at camera shops or at the camera manufacturers to find discounted but still new gear. A lot of the previous generation bodies will be discounted, but even current generation mirrorless cameras can be had at a discount when purchased used. And if you look at previous generation models, you'll find big discounts. Which brings me to the sponsor of this portion of today's video, KEH. KEH is the original re-commerce company, meaning that they buy and sell used gear. I was a customer of KEH before I started working with them, and I continue to go to them to sell my gear and as a source for purchasing used gear. And because this video is all about purchasing gear, let me focus on that for a moment. KEH has quite the variety of gear in stock. Just looking at their mirrorless bodies, there's a few Sony Alpha 7 R3 bodies available, and I'll talk about that camera in a minute or two. And this is funny, I actually sold my Alpha 7 R4 to KEH a few months ago. I wonder if this was mine. Moving down to other last gen bodies, the Fujifilm X-T3 is another body we'll discuss today. We can see exactly what this excellent plus grade means on this table. And this is why I use KEH when purchasing used. I trust their process. They thoroughly test the gear and have this clear rating system that explains the condition of each item, so I know exactly what to expect. I do have affiliate links for you in the description of this video. Using those links to get to KEH helps KEH know to continue supporting this channel. I also have special codes for you in the description that give you a discount on the purchase of gear and a bonus on the sale of your gear. It's a win-win because I also get a small commission, which in combination with the KEH sponsorship helps me continue releasing projects like this video series. So thank you to those of you that use those links, and thank you to KEH for partnering with this channel. Let's dive in. We've each chosen bodies that Raymond and I have used in the last few years. I spent quite some time looking through our archives and re-editing photos and videos. So let's take a look. Actually, Raymond, why don't you start us off with some Nikon recommendations?
Leigh and I have been shooting Nikon for decades, and we've owned or at least used all of the mirrorless bodies in Nikon's Mirrorless Z system. We would recommend any of them to someone just getting started, but the bodies I want to talk specifically about today are the first 4 that were released: the Z7, Z6, Z5, and Z50. Plus, I will mention one more. All of them have capabilities for both stills and video that would lead me to use any of them today. Starting with the Z6 and 7. These are 2 full-frame bodies and the first 2 introduced from the Z system. We could show you any number of outings from those cameras that they went on with us, and because we've owned both of them and we still actually have the Z7. But Leigh pulled photos and videos from 2 big trips that we did with these cameras to narrow it down. First, we packed our Z6 and 7 for a winter trip to Yellowstone National Park. This meant we were capturing wildlife, landscapes, geological features, really everything else that we encountered during our snow coach outings. The newer Z6 II and Z7 II bodies are snappier and overall easier for wildlife photography. But Leigh captured this photo crouched in the doorway of a moving snow coach with the fox running away from us and only stopping for a moment for this shot. The gear, the older Z7, didn't limit her because she was practiced with it and understood what settings to use. We will talk about this again towards the end of the video. We also took the Z6 and 7 to Yellowknife, Canada to photograph the absolutely wonderful Aurora Borealis. Need I say more about that? I mean, it was just absolutely incredible. These cameras performed extremely well during these very cold nights as we were capturing still photos and then setting up time-lapse after time-lapse in the pitch black night. This was a once-in-a-lifetime trip, and Leigh and I agreed that we would happily take these same cameras if we were able to go to Yellowknife again. And fun fact, the Z7 and Z6 actually have the same sensor as their Z7 II and Z6 II successors. So yes, there were improvements to those new bodies, but you're getting the same sensor on the Z7 and Z6. Next, we borrowed the Z5 and took it on 2 trips, one to Durango, Colorado, and one to San Diego, California. The mountains and the beach. We both enjoyed this body as well. Its specifications are a rung lower than the Z6 and 7, which makes it cost less. And it still performed quite well for us, and we used it from a sailboat in San Diego, meaning that both us and the subjects were moving around as the boat was moving side to side. That's a challenging situation for any camera, and it did just fine. Now for the Z50, a compact body with an APS-C sensor that is the lowest price of the Z bodies. We owned this for a while and absolutely loved it. I used this on another one of our trips to San Diego, using its kit lens a lot of the time. You can get that body and lens kit for less than $1,000 on KEH right now, secondhand. I should mention here that Nikon makes a lens adapter that allows you to use many lenses made for their legacy DSLR f-mount with these Z-mount bodies, with some limitations depending on the lens. We've used that adapter extensively on all of the Z bodies with great success, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it for you if you're just getting started unless you do have some help navigating which legacy lenses will work best for you and your preferences. Or if you already do have some legacy f-mount lenses, then the adapter is reasonable, especially if you're comfortable and familiar with those lenses. I should also make quick mention of the Nikon ZFC, which is a compact body with an APS-C sensor, and it has a more retro look and feel, which is fun. It was released only about a year ago, but it could also be a good camera for beginners, especially if you think that you'll like the more tactile controls that it does offer. And last, a note on lenses. All of these bodies can be purchased in a kit with various lenses. We've used most of those kit lenses, and many of the other Nikon Z lenses really can't go wrong with any of them. Nikon's really stepped up optical quality with the Z system, so again, you just can't go wrong.
So true. They are superb. A comment on the Z7. I have used this so much that it was hilarious when I thought about which photos to pull for it, because there are so many. I couldn't even hazard a guess at how many photos I've captured with it. And because I have used Nikon for so long, it just feels like an extension of my body. I could use it in my sleep. But anyway, enough about Nikon. Let's move on to Leica. I understand that Leica is a luxury brand. Leica cameras are amongst the most expensive out there. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them. However, Leica is an aspirational brand. I've talked to so many people over the years that simply want a Leica because that's what their parent or grandparent used. And that's okay, I get it. I own a couple of Leica cameras. I have suggestions for you. The first Leica camera I used was the SL. Leica sent it to me to borrow, and then I went down the path of borrowing several other cameras, purchasing the Q2, which you would have seen in the first video in this series, and the SL2 along the way. If you have held other mirrorless cameras and found them to be too small in your hands, the SL system might be good for you because it is a beefier body. It isn't a super snappy body, it's a more mindful experience, but the output is beautiful. And while the lenses in the SL system are still quite pricey, the SL body on KEH is actually less expensive than I expected. My other Leica suggestion for you is the CL. It's a compact body with an APS-C sensor. It was delightful to walk around with it in a fast prime lens. It stayed out of my way when I was just looking at the art at a museum or hiking in the desert. And for the photography, it provided me all of the capability that I needed. You'll notice I didn't mention an M camera. M cameras can be good for beginners because they force you to be in the moment and pay attention to what you're doing. They're manual focus only, and especially if you're using manual exposure, you'll get to know photography real quick. But the reason that I didn't mention any of them specifically is that the first M body I used was the M10R just 2 years ago. And while it isn't the latest in the M line, it is still quite pricey. And what's more, at the time I loved it, but I've since used the M11, which came out earlier this year. And if it is an M body you want, there's a big difference in dynamic range between the M10R and the M11, which leads me to not want to recommend the M10R at this point. It's not like the M10R isn't a good camera, it's just, it was a significant jump, and I don't quite feel like I can recommend a camera as pricey as the M11 to a beginner who may or may not continue with photography. Does that seem fair to you, Raymond?
Yes, it does. I agree. But I also agree that any M camera could still be good for a beginner who really wants to use the famous Leica M system. So if there's any M users out there, please let the rest of us know down in the comments which you use and if you think that the one that you've chosen would be recommendable to a beginner.
Perfect. I take these recommendations seriously, and we've put a lot of thought behind which cameras to discuss. I just don't feel right about talking about cameras that we haven't personally used, so recommendations from you all are always welcome. But you know what? I think it's time for Raymond to talk about Fujifilm.
We mentioned the fixed lens X100 cameras during the first video in the series, but let's talk about Fujifilm's interchangeable lens cameras. Fujifilm does have some medium format cameras, but today let's just stick to their APS-C bodies, which comprise the majority of their lineup. We've used quite a few of these, but I want to focus on two of them that I think hit the sweet spot for our topic today, the XT3 and the XT30. We borrowed these cameras at the same time and used them interchangeably. They have slightly different bodies, but they contain the same sensor, and we found that they were equally fun to use and equally capable. We used them over 4th of July weekend, so we were able to capture photos of fireworks with them, which of course was a lot of fun. We've mentioned cameras with both full-frame sensors and APS-C sensors so far in this video. I want to address any concerns you might have about APS-C bodies. The sensor is smaller. I guess, though, I just want to say don't be concerned. Especially with newer mirrorless bodies, there's very few compromises you have to make, even for the most intense photography endeavors. What's more, Fujifilm has devoted themselves to the APS-C format and has wonderful lenses optimized for it. even many fast aperture primes, which do allow you to really work in low light or with a shallow depth of field. Those are common criticisms about APS-C, but we just haven't experienced those, especially with the Fujifilm system. So we consider those mitigated with the APS-C format based on Fujifilm's lenses and what the other manufacturers offer for their APS-C systems. We talked about the controls when we recommended the X100 cameras in that previous video, but it's worth saying again, Fujifilm cameras have tactile controls on the body that allow you to see the cause and effect of what you're doing more easily than with many other camera bodies, where you may or may not see all of the settings simply by looking at the top of your camera. With Fujifilm, you can look and you can see them right in front of you in the real world. Something else important about Fujifilm is their pricing. Fujifilm cameras are economical. Even the newer X-T4, which Leigh used last year, it's still a reasonably priced camera body, especially when you consider the feature set that it offers, which is very, very good.
I will add one more to the list, the XS10. It's a current generation Fujifilm body, but it's still affordable. It has a control scheme that's a bit different from the other Fuji bodies, but it has an incredible feature set, especially if you like to shoot video. I mean, I don't think that you can go wrong with any of the Fuji bodies. There have been many conversations between Raymond and I about adding Fujifilm bodies and lenses to the Fuji X100V that we own and love. They're a joy to use.
I'm still not giving up on purchasing the X Pro 3. We didn't talk about that one today, but I absolutely loved that body. And if you like a mindful photography experience, it's worth checking out. Now let's move on and talk about a Panasonic body that I have here, the S5. It's a full frame body at a very competitive price, and there's a few reasons why I personally purchased it. It's an easy to use camera with many ways to customize the controls and plenty of capabilities whether you're talking photo or video. I actually feel this way about all of the cameras we've discussed today. They're simply good all around. Solid specifications that can take you from beginner to more advanced, both with photography and videography, really without compromise. Now, Panasonic doesn't go into fringe specifications or try to sell you on anything that the average photographer doesn't really need, like 8K or 60 frames per second stills. Those are nice, but I don't use them a lot, and with the S5, I didn't feel like I needed them. So, depending on what you're doing, I'm not saying those features wouldn't be useful for you, but again, it's about effective use most often, especially when you're getting started. Now back to the S5. The other reason why I wanted it and want to recommend it to you is because it makes use of Leica L-mount lenses. The same ones you would use with the Leica SL system, plus other lenses made for the L-mount. This is a good place also to mention independent lens manufacturers like Sigma. Sigma, Panasonic, and Leica created the L-mount alliance, which means they cooperate on the L-mount. So you can use lenses from all three on L-mount bodies from all three. You get a lot of options. You can purchase more budget-friendly lenses by Panasonic and Sigma. Plus, as you progress with your photography, you can opt to invest in a few Leica L-mount lenses or even a Leica body. Both Leigh and I enjoy that flexibility, and we've taken advantage of it with the L-mount system that we've put together.
I love the intention behind the L-mount alliance. Raymond just mentioned Sigma, an independent lens manufacturer. They've been releasing very high quality lenses at reasonable prices for L-mount in recent years, but they've also been doing the same thing for Sony's E-mount, which leads me to discuss a few Sony bodies. I have used quite a number of Sony bodies over the years. While all of the cameras that we've discussed today are good all-around cameras, and these Sony bodies would also fit into that, I would say that Sony has the most advanced autofocus system. So if that's the one thing you really want, Sony may be the way to go. I say may be the way to go because all of these cameras that we've discussed today have very good autofocus systems. It's just that Sony has been developing the more advanced autofocus tracking and detection features for longer, so naturally they're more advanced. I want to be clear though, that I do not think that everyone needs or wants that. Anyway, moving on to some specific recommendations. Let's start with a couple of full frame bodies, the Alpha 7C and the Alpha 7R3. Both could be good choices for beginners. The Alpha 7C is a quite compact body that was released less than 2 years ago, while the Alpha 7R3 is a bit older and is still compact, but the size is more in line with other full-frame mirrorless bodies out there. I went on quite a few exciting outings with the Alpha 7R3, including a hot air balloon ride over Sedona, Arizona at sunrise, and then astrophotography there later that night. A little bit of Raymond on his mountain bike, and of course just walking around with the camera in a variety of lenses, capturing whatever came my way. But I could have captured every one of those photos with the Alpha 7C, which has about half the number of pixels on the sensor. So if the idea of a compact full-frame body interests you, the Alpha 7C is worth a look. Speaking of compact, we should not ignore Sony's APS-C bodies. I have used the Alpha 6100 and Alpha 6400. They are both highly capable, but very compact. I captured all sorts of different things with both of those bodies. At a Sony event, they had beautiful studio settings with models that I captured with the Alpha 6400. I had the Alpha 6100 for a while at home and captured wildlife, even birds in flight. These more compact bodies don't have all of the controls on the body itself that the full frame bodies do, but you can customize them so that you can access your most used controls easily. That way, you can be faster with your camera when the opportunity presents itself. One last point for Sony is that they have the largest native line of lenses to go along with all of the lenses that independent lens manufacturers like Sigma and Tamron are making for the E-mount. The benefit to this is that you simply have a ton of options.
Now you'll notice that we didn't get deep into the technical specifications or lens choice. That's because any of the mirrorless bodies that have been released in the past 5 years are just quite competent no matter what. And the lenses that have been developed for mirrorless bodies are all equally solid performers. They're all basically new designs. It's tough for me to point out any bad lenses out there. They just work. When selecting that beginner body, if you want to get into video, it is nice to have in-body image stabilization. If you want to capture birds in flight, certainly autofocus tracking and super fast frames per second is nice. But all of the cameras we've mentioned today will get the job done. I mentioned this in some of the videos in this series already. Your skills as a photographer will improve your photography much more than any one particular camera specification. And if you do want to improve those skills, we do have a couple of complete courses available for free. I recommend starting with Leigh's Basics of Photography course, and we'll link to it down in that description below this video.
That is a good place to start. And I do go deeper into considerations for purchasing your first camera in that course. But like I said in the beginning of this video, these are absolutely not the only options available that would be appropriate for beginners. If you are interested in a mirrorless system, like Raymond said, anything made in the last 5 years or so is going to be a good choice. Certainly anything in any of the camera brand's current lineups would be wonderful to learn with. It's important to remember that there is no one best camera out there for anyone, beginner or not. A beginner could purchase the most expensive camera on the market, a whole slew of lenses, and learn with it. Or a beginner could simply use their phone's camera and work on composition, on creativity and editing. Every person that chooses to take up photography has a slightly different purpose and budget and is in a different stage of life. As long as you are paying attention, you can and should get started with anything you want. Raymond mentioned that time in Yellowstone where I was crouching in the door of a moving vehicle, capturing an animal that was running. I don't suggest doing that, by the way. Okay, I certainly would have gotten more usable images with a faster camera, but that wouldn't necessarily be true for someone who is just getting started in photography. Like Raymond said, technique and practicing with your camera, like I have, is far more important than specifications. So that being said, for those of you that have already started your photography journey, what are your mirrorless gear suggestions for beginners? We do have one more video in this series. We will be back with it in a few weeks. I want to thank KEH again for continuing to support this channel. Remember, my links and codes are in the description of this video. I will also add links to any of the bodies that we mentioned that I notice are on KEH right now. Plus, I'll add even more links to the description. I have videos for probably every camera that we've mentioned today, sometimes more than one video, so I will link to those as well. If any of the cameras that we've mentioned today piqued your interest, you'll be able to learn more about them, see more photos that we took with them in those videos. But that's all for this video. Thank you for watching.